Don't forget to like and share this video. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and sign up to stay updated with our latest content. What if one quiet conversation could unravel everything you thought you knew about your life and your marriage? At 62, Evelyn believed her days of surprises were long behind her, until a private moment at a corporate gala opened her eyes to a truth she hadn't dared to face. What was said that night, and who said it, set her on a path of reflection, honesty, and emotional awakening. Curious how one question changed everything? Keep watching. For Evelyn, life had settled into a familiar rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to her garden, afternoons filled with quiet reading, and evenings beside her husband, Mark, a man she had loved and supported for nearly 40 years. Their life was stable, comfortable, predictable. After decades of marriage, Evelyn had made peace with the quiet, assuming that the trade-off for security was letting go of things like excitement, spontaneity, and emotional curiosity. But all of that began to shift on a night she hadn't expected to mean anything at all. Mark, ever the loyal employee, invited Evelyn to attend his company's annual gala, an upscale evening of cocktails, conversations, and corporate chatter. Evelyn wasn't fond of large events, but she agreed out of habit, slipping into a modest navy dress and playing the supportive role she'd perfected over the years. At first, everything unfolded just as expected. Mark was quickly swept into conversations with colleagues, while Evelyn exchanged pleasantries with other spouses. It was the kind of evening she had attended many times before, ordinary, predictable, until Richard Caldwell, Mark's longtime boss, approached her with a calm but unexpected request. "Evelyn, may I have a moment?" His voice was gentle but carried a weight that made her pause. With polite curiosity, she followed him to a quiet lounge away from the main ballroom. It was there, in the warm glow of the fireplace and the hum of silence, that Richard said the words that would stir something Evelyn hadn't felt in years. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The statement hit her like a sudden gust of wind, startling, unwelcome, yet impossible to ignore. Richard spoke not as an outsider meddling in a marriage, but as someone who had been quietly observing for years. He spoke of how he had seen her fade into the background at events, how she gave so much without ever seeming to receive anything in return. Evelyn wanted to defend Mark, to dismiss Richard's words as misread intention, but deep down, a truth she had long buried began to surface. That moment, brief and unexpected, would unravel more than Evelyn ever imagined. It planted a quiet question in her heart. Had she gone unseen for so long that she had forgotten how to see herself? If you're still watching and finding these insights valuable, drop a comment below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's get back to the video. In the days following the gala, Evelyn couldn't shake Richard's words. "You deserve to be seen." They echoed in her mind, soft but persistent, like a melody she couldn't stop humming. She went about her routines, folding laundry, watering the garden, preparing Mark's favorite meals. But nothing felt the same. Everything familiar suddenly felt laced with quiet disappointment. Had she really spent so many years unnoticed? Evelyn found herself staring at old photographs tucked away in drawers, images of a younger version of herself, full of life and unspoken ambition. Back then, she had dreams of traveling, of painting, of learning Italian just because it sounded beautiful. Over time, those dreams were quietly shelved for more practical roles. Wife, homemaker, caregiver. She had done it willingly with love. But now she wondered, had she lost herself in the process? The hardest part wasn't facing the silence in her home, but the silence within herself. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her what she wanted, and worse, she couldn't remember the last time she'd asked herself that question either. Mark hadn't changed. He was still kind, steady, reliable. He still kissed her on the cheek before work and asked if she needed anything from the store. But Evelyn began to notice how much of their communication had become routine, transactional. It wasn't just that he didn't see her. It was that she had stopped expecting to be seen. Richard's words had struck a chord because they weren't romantic. They were honest. He had noticed something she had long buried beneath years of selflessness. Her quiet longing to be acknowledged not just for what she did, but for who she was. And now, she couldn't unfeel it. Late one night, as Mark slept beside her, Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed and looked at her reflection in the mirror across the room. Her silver-streaked hair glowed softly in the moonlight. Her face, lined by time and experience, told the story of a life lived for others. But her eyes still held questions. What if she had more to discover about herself? What if it wasn't too late? Richard hadn't asked her to change her life. He had only reminded her she had one. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn found herself wondering, what would it feel like to live it for herself? The shift wasn't sudden, it was slow, like fog creeping into a familiar room. But once Evelyn had seen it, she couldn't unsee it. She began to notice the spaces between her and Mark, not the physical ones, but the emotional gaps that had quietly widened over the years. At breakfast, their conversations revolved around errands and appointments. During dinner, the television filled the silence that neither of them acknowledged. Mark was polite, thoughtful even, in the way that longtime spouses often are. But there was no warmth in his questions, no spark behind his compliments, only habit. Evelyn had always believed that this was simply what long marriages became, steady, functional, built on years of shared responsibility and quiet understanding. But now she wasn't so sure. She began to wonder if love was supposed to settle into silence, or if it had slowly withered under the weight of routine. She tried to remember the last time Mark had looked at her with curiosity. Not the kind of glance that asked, "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" but one that said, "I see you. I'm still learning you. I still want to know who you are." She couldn't recall. Somewhere along the line, they had stopped discovering each other. One afternoon, she stood in the doorway of Mark's home office, watching him scroll through emails. He looked tired, absorbed in a world of deadlines and numbers. Evelyn hesitated, then gently asked, "Do you ever think about us?" Mark glanced up, distracted. "What do you mean?" "Just, if we're really happy," she said softly. He blinked. "I mean, sure, aren't we?" His answer wasn't cruel, it was simply unexamined. That's what startled her most. After everything they had built, he had never stopped to ask if what they had was still enough. That evening, as Mark sat in his usual chair, reading the news with the TV murmuring in the background, Evelyn watched him and realized something painful. She had become a fixture in his life, reliable, familiar, always there, but not alive in his eyes. The ache wasn't from resentment, it was from longing. She hadn't asked for fireworks, just presents, just to be felt again. Richard's words echoed once more in her mind. You deserve to be seen. And now Evelyn was beginning to believe it. The next morning, Evelyn woke earlier than usual. Outside, a soft light filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the bedroom. Mark was still asleep beside her, breathing steadily, a sight that once brought her comfort, but now filled her with a quiet sense of distance. She moved to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea, then sat at the breakfast table where they used to plan their lives together. But instead of writing grocery lists or appointments, she reached for a blank sheet of paper and wrote a single question at the top. Who am I outside of being a wife? It was such a simple question, and yet she found herself unable to answer it right away. For over 40 years, she had defined herself through what she did for others, being Mark's partner, keeping the house in order, offering support through every chapter of their life together. But if she stripped all of that away, what remained? She thought back to her younger self. Before marriage, before the weight of routine, she used to love photography, used to dream of opening a little bookshop, used to get lost in poetry for hours. How long had it been since she picked up a camera or read a novel simply because it made her heart stir? Richard's words echoed in her mind, not as a disruption, but as a mirror. He hadn't just seen her as someone's wife, someone in the background. He had seen her. Their conversation at the cafe hadn't been about betrayal or romantic temptation. It had been about awakening, about pausing long enough to ask, "What do you want, Evelyn?" That morning, Evelyn made a decision. She wouldn't rush into anything. She wouldn't act out of confusion or longing, but she would begin something, quietly, slowly, and just for herself. She would go to the bookstore she used to love, dig out her old camera, maybe even take a painting class at the community center. Small things, her things. And if Mark wanted to walk beside her in that rediscovery, that would be beautiful. But if he didn't, she finally knew she had the strength to walk that road alone, not to leave, but to remember who she had been and who she still might become. That evening, Evelyn waited until the house was quiet and the dishes were done. Mark had just finished reading the news on his tablet, and she could tell from the way his eyes lingered on the screen that his mind was still at work. But tonight, Evelyn wasn't willing to let the moment slip away. "Mark," she said gently, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, "can we talk?" He looked up, surprised. "Of course. Everything okay?" She hesitated for just a second, then nodded slowly. "I think so. But I need to be honest with you about something I've been feeling." Mark set the tablet down, his brow furrowing with concern. "What is it?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "Lately, I've been feeling invisible." His eyes widened. "Invisible? Evelyn, what do you mean?" She reached for his hand, steady but firm. "I don't mean you've been unkind or neglectful, not in any obvious way. But I've realized I've spent so many years being your partner, your support system, your constant, that somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else. And I think maybe you stopped seeing me as anything else too." Mark's face softened and he leaned back slightly. "I didn't know you felt that way. I guess I've just been on autopilot. Work, home, trying to keep things steady." "I know," she said, her voice quiet. "You've given us a good life, and I've been grateful. But I need something more now. Not from you necessarily, but from myself. I need to remember who I am." Mark was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling around them. "Are you thinking of leaving?" She shook her head. "No, I'm thinking of beginning, of finding something that's mine, and I hope you'll support that." He nodded slowly, emotion flickering in his eyes. "Then I want to try to really see you again, to understand what you need and maybe even figure out what I've forgotten about myself too." For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt her shoulders relax. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning, an honest one. And in that moment, she realized that rediscovering herself didn't mean giving up the life she had built. It meant reclaiming the parts of herself she had quietly set aside along the way. In the days that followed their conversation, something subtle but important began to shift between Evelyn and Mark. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, but there was a new quiet awareness between them, a sense that something unspoken had finally been brought into the light. Mark began asking questions he hadn't asked in years. "What are you reading these days? Do you still think about that art class you used to love? What would make you feel more fulfilled?" They were small questions, but they meant everything to Evelyn. For the first time in decades, he wasn't just listening, he was seeing her. But Evelyn also knew this couldn't just be about their marriage. It had to be about her. So she made a promise to herself. Each week she would do one thing solely for her own joy. She started small, a visit to the botanical garden alone on a Wednesday morning, a beginner's watercolor class at the community center on Saturday afternoons. She pulled out her old journal, one she hadn't touched in years, and began to write, not about chores or grocery lists, but about how she felt, what she longed for, what she remembered loving before life had become so routine. At first it felt strange, like she was borrowing someone else's life, but gradually that feeling was replaced with something else, recognition. She remembered the young woman who used to spend hours sketching by the lake, who had dreams of traveling to the Southwest, who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen just because the radio was on. That woman was still there, just quieter now. But with every passing day, Evelyn gave her more room to breathe. Mark noticed too. He came home one evening to find Evelyn in the middle of painting a small canvas. She had a smudge of blue on her cheek and a peaceful expression he hadn't seen in years. "That looks beautiful," he said. "It feels beautiful," she replied simply. The change wasn't just in Evelyn. As she began reconnecting with herself, it brought out something new in Mark, too. He started sharing more about his regrets, his unspoken fears, and the things he'd buried under decades of responsibility. For the first time, their conversations weren't just about to-do lists and family updates. They were about the people they were and the people they were still becoming. As autumn deepened and golden leaves carpeted the streets, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in years: peace. It wasn't that everything had magically resolved. There were still moments of uncertainty, quiet evenings when the old doubts crept back in, but now she faced them with clarity. She had given herself permission to feel, to explore, and to speak truths long buried beneath decades of silence. One crisp afternoon, as she and Mark walked hand in hand through the park, he glanced at her with soft eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said, "for choosing yourself, for helping us both wake up." Tears pricked her eyes, not out of sadness, but relief. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn knew she hadn't just been seen. She had been understood. She didn't know exactly where the road ahead would lead, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had found herself again in the quiet moments, in honest conversations, and in the courage to ask, "What do I want?" And that question, asked at 62, had become the beginning of something new, not just for Evelyn, but for the life she still had yet to live. Evelyn's story is a gentle reminder that it's never too late to rediscover yourself. Whether you're 62 or 82, your feelings matter, your voice matters. Life doesn't stop evolving after a certain age, and neither should you. In the quiet moments of questioning, there is power. In choosing yourself, there is freedom. So if you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or simply faded into the background of your own life, ask yourself, what do I want now? You may be surprised by what still waits to bloom. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments one key insight you gained and how you plan to apply it in your life. Your feedback is invaluable and keeps us motivated. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating content that informs and inspires. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to see you in the next video.